Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for today's commentary. And so I want to do a real quick deep dive into what we see here coming to play. Remember we've got I want to kind of go backwards a little bit and kind of take us back to Noah and Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And you remember that moment when we read about Noah, after they were repopulating, he plants a vineyard, he drinks too much, gets drunk, and then there's this kind of weird moment where one of his sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, one of his sons goes in, sees him naked because he had passed out, and doesn't really honor his father, doesn't respect him, and kind of, treat it with dignity and cover him up. He goes out and kind of, is kind of depicts him really kind of, poking fun at Noah. And this is what happens. Um, Genesis 9, it says, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his brothers. And then Shem and Japheth took a robe, held it over their shoulders, and backed into the tent to cover their father. As they did this, they looked the other way so they would not see him naked. Now, when Noah woke up from his stupor, he learned what Ham, his youngest son, had done, and then he cursed Canaan, the son of Ham. May Canaan be cursed. May he be the lowest of servants to his relatives. And then Noah said, May the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed, and may Canaan be his servant. And may God expand the territory of Japheth. And may Japheth share the prosperity of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. Okay, so it's fascinating when you begin to see the Israelite family begin to develop, right? And now we fast forward to Abraham, okay? And Abraham is a descendant of the Semites, of Shem. You follow, his father was Terah, and he tracks back to Shem, okay? And so we have Terah, Abraham, who has Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel. Israel has the 12 tribes of Israel who become the Israelites. The ones that Abraham had declared, let them be blessed, and let the Canaanites, okay, Ham's son, who had done this, kind of detestable thing with this, in that moment with Noah, may Ham's sons serve Shem, and may Shem and Japheth, kind of be together, and may Japheth's sons be served by Ham's sons, and so we're seeing a family tree be built, okay, and we see some open hostility begin to be built in these family tribes, and in that era, it's a tribal system, right? And so now we see we just see some factions begin to develop, and family, when we go further and we begin to read in the Old Testament about these groups of people who are living in hostility, together. These are family trees that have grown, and now they begin to live in hostility. And so I just kind of wanted to point us to some of the major players in the Old Testament. Again, just trying to get that 10,000-foot view as you're reading through, and like, who are these people? And we're reading their names and all of those things. And it matters because God is carefully making sure that the genealogical history is being laid out so people can understand, what has happened. And so, if you'll remember, Abraham, his nephew Lot, okay, his descendants end up being, and they live east of the Jordan, okay? The Israelites are going to come eventually with Moses, Abraham's descendants. We're moving a little forward here, but the Israelites are going to come up, and they're going to come through the Sinai Peninsula. They're going to come through the Sinai wilderness to Mount Sinai and get the Ten Commandments. From there, they're going to travel up east of the Jordan River. They're going to circle to the east, and they're going to go up to the east of the Jordan River, and they're going to come upon the Moabites, and then they're going to come upon the Ammonites live even north of that. those are nations that end up being living in hostility towards the Israelites. And then eventually we're going to see the Edomites, who become hill kind of mountain type people. The Edomites, they are the descendants of Esau, who we just read about. Jacob had twin sons, right? Excuse me. Isaac had twin sons, Jacob and Jacob and his brother Esau. They end up living in contention. Esau's family ends up in the mountains and live in kind of contention with the Israelites, the sons of Jacob. And so I know it can be a little confusing. I just want you to see we're seeing the family spread. We see these nations being built, and we see really kind of this contention that begins to exist within these family nations. And so Lot, if you remember, Abraham and Lot, they came to a point to where they went in different directions, right? And then Abraham has to go and rescue Lot, from Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, his descendants become the Ammonites, who are the ones just northeast of the Jordan River. Also, his descendants are the Moabites, who are just to the east of the Jordan River. And so both of them, they're descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot, and they're kin to the Israelites, but they're adversaries. Okay, and I mentioned Esau's descendants, and they're the Edomites. Okay, they descended from Edom, who was Jacob's twin brother, and then also coming out of Esau's family tree are the Amalekites. You'll read about them. The Amalekites, that's a tribe that descended from Amalek, who was a grandson of Esau. Okay, so again, relationship to Israel, they're descendants of Jacob's brother. They were considered brothers, but again, also very hostile in future relationship. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the Canaanite people in the Promised Land. Okay, remember, God brings Abraham and his father through from the land of Hur up to Terah, which is in Canaan. Okay, and Abraham settles there. He makes some altars, and eventually he settles there in the area of Canaan. Okay, the land of Canaan, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. These are groups that are normally considered the descendants of, go back to Canaan, okay, the son of Ham. There's a lot of contention with the Canaanites and the Israelites, okay? The Israelites, they're descendants from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Back here with, I hope you're following me. You have Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the one who messed up, that Abraham cursed his son Canaan, who ends up settling in the Canaanites, okay? And so the descendants of Ham are the Canaanites, and they're the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, and then the Amorites. Those are a prominent people in the land of Canaan, described as powerful kingdoms, and a lot of times in conflict with Israel. Again, they're native inhabitants to Canaan, distinct from the Semite people, but related in the broad, coming from the Noahic family tree. Okay, another interesting thing when it comes to Japheth, because it's like, okay, we figure out it was Ham, who was cursed by Abraham. He ends up, cursed by Noah. He ends up, being the descendants of his descendants become the Canaanites, and Shem, his descendants become Abraham and his family, but what happens to Japheth? Japheth's family tree. he's typically, his family tree is traced to kind of the European groups, and often, the European, and even like the Greeks, Alexander the Great, those family trees trace back to Japheth, typically, when you're doing the study. So again, just kind of want us to, just a little bit of a lesson on kind of family trees and where these people came from, and again, the broader conflict that happens, but it's happening through people that are related in some fashion, that we can trace them all the way back to Noah. So I don't know if that fascinates you or not, but it fascinates me, especially as we begin to read, some of the details of the story, and kind of where all of these people are coming from, who they're attached to, and where they fit in the greater narrative of humanity itself as it has developed. We're going to see tomorrow where the conflict between the Jacob, whose name becomes Israel, Jacob, and his twin brother Esau. And we'll see some of that begin to play out. And all of this is going to play out, we'll see later on, as the Israelites become established. Jacob's family becomes established in the promised land, and then later on, all of the wars that are happening, and even when Babylon attacks from the north and comes in and sweeps them away and takes them into captivity, exile. We'll see what happens. There's some struggle there because the Edomites, who are family tree to Israel, don't come in and help them when the Babylonians come in and sweep and take them away. And so those are some interplays that happen in the Old Testament. But again, we're getting the story of God and the story of redemption, and how God is working specifically with a family that stays centered in Him, while other families kind of diffuse, and they spread out, and even eventually become living in conflict with Abraham's son Jacob, and the Israelites, who are trying to follow God. And a lot of the Canaanites, remember, they become very ungodly. They become horrifically wicked. Okay, and they are not the follower of Yahweh. They're not the follower of Jehovah God, and so they end up living outside of the blessing of God. And the Israelites are called by God to say, and God says to them when they move back into the promised land, I don't want you intermarrying with the Canaanites. I don't want you, don't give your daughters in marriage to them, and do not worship their false gods. And so that's where a lot of this starts coming into play later on, as the Israelites, keep themselves separate from the rest of those other nations. So hope that helps a little bit, gives you a little bit of a deeper lesson in the people groups and the conflicts that are arising. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. God bless you.